We'll get started in just a moment. In the meantime, I'd invite everyone to check their chat functions on their WebEx features. It's in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. I'm going to be posting some resources in the chat function along the way to help everyone access answers to some of those questions that they might have about what work can be done by different ages of young workers, some of the opportunities that are there, and some of the resources for both employers and young workers to know their rights and responsibilities. So I'll post that into the chat and we'll get started in just a moment. Thank you very much. All right, everyone, we'll get underway now. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jennifer Serino, Assistant Deputy Secretary here at the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development. We are so thrilled to bring you today's webinar, Welcome to the Workforce, celebrating that moment in time when all of our students, our employers, our parents are getting ready for those summer jobs and for those first opportunities in the workforce that really will lead them to a successful future. Now, in just a moment, you'll get a chance to hear from representatives from the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development, the U.S. Department of Labor, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and some of the experts in our DWD's Division of Equal Rights and Bureau of Apprenticeship Standards, sharing resources for teens entering the workforce, their parents and guardians, and potential employers. Now, just a few housekeeping items before we get started. Today's webinar is going to last 1 hour. It's a recorded event, and you'll find closed captioning for those of you who wish to use it at the bottom left of your screen. If you click that little CC, you'll be able to access the closed captioning function. Again, we'd like to use chat for your questions. If you want to start using the chat, you can feel free to send questions in now, and then we'll take those questions at the end of the event. We'll kind of organize them by theme or topic and submit them to our panelists. Now, I'd like to introduce our presenters. We have an incredible lineup here for you today. We should be able to answer most of those questions and also really get you excited about the future ahead for yourself, for your teen, or for your future employees. Joining us today, you'll hear from our Department of Workforce Development Secretary, Amy Pahachik. We'll also hear from Ramona Natera. Ramona is the Division Administrator for our Equal Rights Division. Matt White is the Director of the Bureau of Investigations for the Equal Rights Division of DWD. Kristen Tout is District Director at the U.S. Department of Labor. Tom McCarthy is Associate Deputy State Superintendent of the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. And David Polk is Director of our Bureau of Apprenticeship Standards in Wisconsin. And now I'm so pleased to turn things over to our Secretary, Amy Pahachik. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny, and good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. So the Department of Workforce Development, known as DWD for short, is the state agency that connects people with jobs. And there's no better time to do that than now, as Governor Tony Evers has issued an official state proclamation indicating that April is Welcome to the Workforce Month. This is the time of year when many teen workers are looking for and securing their summer employment, and our younger teen workers are getting their work permits. For our state's newest workers, getting their very first job is a big deal. It's a milestone to celebrate. In his official proclamation celebrating teens in the labor force, the governor recognizes what some of us parents might not always see at home. Our Wisconsin teens are incredibly hardworking. They are also a critical part of our economy. Consider this: Wisconsin teens play an important role in the state's workforce, especially when it comes to Wisconsin's growing leisure, hospitality, and retail businesses. Wisconsin teens' labor force participation rate for 16 to 19-year-olds is 55.3%, more than 18 percentage points higher than the national average. In all, more than 150,000 teens are hard at work here in Wisconsin. They do all kinds of jobs here in our state. They keep our retail stores running, they help our service industry succeed, and they keep our yards green, just to name a few. The teens in our labor force have never been more important because once again, our economy is going strong and breaking records. For February 2024, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics employment estimates showed year-over-year gains in labor force, employment, and jobs. Wisconsin's seasonally adjusted unemployment was a very low 3%. Meanwhile, we've hit a record high of more than 3 million jobs in our state. We know this wouldn't be possible without the work of our teens. And all of this means teens in the workforce can command some pretty impressive wages for their work. Nationally, wages in retail and leisure and hospitality have outpaced the growth of total private sector wages since 2020. And we're seeing some of this reflected here in Wisconsin. One example close to home? Well, according to local job postings, Culver's is paying between $14 and $17 per hour for crew members. Welcome to the Workforce Month celebrates teens who are seeking their first job, earning their first paycheck, gaining more responsibility, and learning some of the important interpersonal skills that will lead to a lifetime of opportunity. At DWD, we also want to make sure that teens, their parents, and their employers learn about their rights and responsibilities. DWD is here to support all facets of development for our future workforce and for our employers. We can assist employers with staffing, provide funding for custom labor training, and provide guidance on worker safety. We're also here to help employers understand and operate within the law. We envision Wisconsin as a fair and just place for all people to live and work. For younger workers, that began all the way back in 1867 when Wisconsin passed its first law regulating child labor. Even back then, our state was on the cutting edge of a national movement to protect workers on the job, especially our young workers. Today, our Equal Rights Division oversees labor laws, which includes everything from wages to hours worked. Equal Rights Division Administrator Ramona Natera is here to tell us more.
Thank you, Secretary Pahachek, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to celebrate Welcome to the Workforce Month and discuss important employment information with the parents and employers of our state's future workforce. I'm Equal Rights Division Administrator Ramona Natera, and today I'll be sharing need-to-know information for the parents, guardians, and employers of teens as they prepare for their first job. The Equal Rights Division, ERD, enforces over 40 different laws, including laws related to anti-discrimination, equal opportunity, wage and hour, FMLA, and of course, the employment of minors. We investigate complaints of violations, issue determinations, mediate cases, and hold hearings. A big part of what we do is educate people just like you about your rights and responsibilities in the workforce and in housing. In fact, our equal rights officers are available Monday through Friday during business hours by phone or email to answer your questions. You can find lots of great information about ERD services and resources online at dwd.wisconsin.gov/ER. Did you know that in Wisconsin, minors who are 14 and 15 years old must have a valid work permit to work in any job except agriculture, domestic service work, or in youth apprenticeships? Work permits can be applied for online using our new online work permit application system. The online application is easy to navigate, and parents and guardians can secure a work permit for their minor in as little as 10 minutes. It's important for parents and guardians to understand that a work permit must be applied for after the teen has received a job offer before they can begin working. It's equally as important for employers to understand that the $10 work permit application fee paid for by the parent or guardian at the time of purchase must be reimbursed to the teen by no later than their first paycheck. When it comes to worker rights and employer responsibilities, the ERD is here for parents, employers, and teens. So know your rights understand your responsibilities, get the job, secure the permit, and welcome to the workforce. Now, I'll turn it over to ERD Investigations Bureau Director, Matt White.
Thank you, Ramona. I'm Matt White. I'm the Director of the Investigations Bureau. We are proud to welcome you to the Welcome to the Workforce. And I just want to tell you about a few resources that we have, first of all. So we've created a series of short videos about the rights and responsibilities of teen workers. Those are on our website or on our YouTube channel, either one. Ramona mentioned the new work permit application, but that's been tremendously successful and is so much more convenient than the old system. And then we have all of our web pages. We've made a very careful effort to put them into sort of brief, plain language explanations of the rights and responsibilities of both workers and employers to make it easy for you to find the information you need. I'm going to talk about the regulation of the employment of minors. Minors, of course, are those who are under 18 years of age. There is a federal law equivalent to our laws called the Fair Labor Standards Act, which Kristen will be talking about after me. The important thing to know is that they are about 99% similar. There are just a couple of differences, so you just want to check that carefully when you are determining whether or not you are compliant with both state and federal law. And then Wisconsin has our child labor and street trades laws, which are sort of the all-encompassing rules that cover the employment of minors in the state. So our law regulates both the types of work in which minors may engage and the hours of labor. And the types of work includes the requirement that 14 and 15-year-olds, in many cases, most cases, in fact, have to have a work permit. And there's also a list, which I will give you a link to a little bit later in the presentation, that lists off all of the prohibited and hazardous occupations for minors. As far as the hours of labor are concerned, for 16 and 17-year-olds, they pretty much can work at any time that they're not required to be attending school. 14 and 15-year-olds have more limited hours of work in most cases, limiting them to about 3 hours a day on a work day, and they have to be between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. This is also identical to the rules under the Fair Labor Standards Act, which again, Kristen will talk about shortly. So. Generally, a minor must be 14 years of age to work, although there are these exceptions listed down here below, and I won't go through all of those. The only one I want to mention specifically is street trades, because that confuses people a little bit. That is things like delivering newspapers or working in concessions or those kinds of things. Back in the day, it used to be people who did shoe shines, that kind of stuff. So it's not as prevalent of an area as it once was, but it is still an area where in some cases, minors can work under the age of 14. Next slide. For prohibited employment, generally speaking, when we're talking about things that are prohibited to all minors, that's including 16 and 17-year-olds, it's generally speaking, it's a type of work or a piece of machinery that's prohibited, not an establishment. So, for instance, you can't use a 16 or 17-year-old can't operate a forklift. Neither can a 14 or 15-year-old, clearly. There's another sort of subsection of prohibited employment that only applies to 14 and 15-year-olds, and that tends to be somewhat broader in some cases. So 14 and 15-year-olds can't work construction at all, they can't work manufacturing at all, and so on. It depends on the age of the minor, and again, the resources that we have will reflect what is appropriate for a minor of any particular age. Work prohibited to all minors is listed alphabetically in our administrative code at section 270.12. It includes things that are obvious, like coal mines, and things that may not be as obvious, like hoists and hoisting apparatuses or bakery machines. Meat processing has been kind of a big issue. That is a no-no for minors, all minors. And I want to mention that it's important to read each section when you're trying to determine whether or not someone is prohibited from doing the work, because there are often exceptions to the rule, or sort of certain tasks that they can perform and certain tasks that they can't perform. So you should always check and see exactly what the rule says. There is an additional section, as I mentioned, that's work prohibited only to minors under the age of 16. That's the following section, 270.13. And like I said, it includes establishments as well as some tasks. So construction, manufacturing, mining, processing, these are all things that 14, 15-year-olds categorically cannot do. And again, certain sections have exceptions and clarifications to these rules. There are sort of three exceptions in our law as far as certain types of prohibited employment tasks that can be performed under certain circumstances, and those are for registered apprentices, for high school graduates, and for student learners. Well, student learners is going to be the one that's most pertinent for today, but I'll go over these all three briefly here. So, sorry, I was not quite ready. The registered apprentice exception is for a contract of indenture. This is normally for 18-year-olds, but occasionally you have someone who graduates early or who signs with parental consent a registered apprenticeship, which is sort of the full-blown adult apprenticeship. And there are many of the prohibited tasks are permitted to registered apprentices who are learning the task in the context of their apprenticeship. High school graduates, similarly, there are a number of exceptions for people that graduate high school early. Some tasks, though, are still absolutely prohibited to minors, even if they've graduated high school, and those include like coal mining and some of the obvious ones. If you have a question about that, there's a good section on our website about it, and I encourage you to check it. And now I will talk about student learners. Thank you. Next slide. So a student learner is a learner in an accredited school in Wisconsin who is employed on a part-time basis and is for both scholastic credit with the school and also for employment training with the employer. And there is, as a feature of this arrangement, there is always a bona fide written school work training program agreement. Now, the most common kind of this that fits under this exemption is the youth apprenticeship program from our Bureau of Apprenticeship Standards, which David will talk about in a moment. Next slide, please. These are some tasks that are always prohibited to student learners. So even if the person is under a bona fide work school training agreement, they still cannot perform certain tasks that are deemed to be too hazardous for minors. Again, these include bakery machines, coal mining explosives, radioactive materials, mining, working in logging or sawmills, always prohibited. Hoist or hoisting apparatus is always prohibited, except those are which are allowed to minors. That's a good section to check for exceptions if you are considering it. There are very specific rules about when a 17-year-old can be a motor vehicle driver, but in most cases minors cannot, and they cannot be outside helpers. That would be like the person who rides on the back of the truck and hops off to throw the trash in or whatever. No working with machinery that has strikes or lockouts, no demolition, no wrecking, no gun clubs, and again, manufacturing, mining, or processing applications are always prohibited under 16, even for student learners. I've got some QR codes here for you. The first one is to our index for prohibited employment. That is sort of an alphabetical list of all of the hazardous and prohibited employment for all minors, and we try to spell out the exceptions there or to give examples. Again, each section has a link to our administrative code, and I encourage you, if you're unsure, to either read that specific section of the administrative code and check for exceptions, or to contact the Equal Rights Division and talk to one of our equal rights officers who can talk you through the situation and ask you follow-up questions to try and help you determine whether or not you're in compliance with the law. And then the second QR code here is for our manufacturing construction equipment guide, which we developed with the folks in the Bureau of Apprenticeship Standards. It's a very handy resource if you're dealing with student learners. It lists a number of very common tasks that take place in a lot of these youth apprenticeship pathways. They tell you whether or not it's normally prohibited employment, and then whether under the student learner exemption, there is some limited ability for that student to learn the task on an incidental basis and under the supervision of a trained worker. And that's it for me. I will turn it over to Kristen Tout from the Department of Labor. Kristen.
Hello, everyone. I am Kristen Tout. I'm the District Director for the U.S. Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. The district I serve covers the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin. And I will talk about the federal laws that apply to workers, businesses. And as you'll hear, you will hear some repetition. But I want to just start out by saying that the federal laws and regulations and our approach to enforcing them really do take into account that entering the workforce enables teens to learn the skills, to gain valuable job experience while earning that paycheck. There is a highly positive experience that you're able to enjoy in getting that first job. And it really can be a great experience when it is taking place in an environment that is safe, that takes into consideration a teen worker's health and well-being, and doesn't infringe on that teen's educational opportunities. I want to talk about one of the things I mentioned first was just that we're here to get valuable experience and learn new skills, but also to earn a paycheck. So just very briefly wanted to talk about the requirements for wages. And at the federal department, there is a minimum wage that mirrors the states, which is $7.25 an hour. Though, as you heard some positive things about the incoming wages at some of our local retail and food chains. But the minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. And there can't be deductions from wages for things that you didn't anticipate, things for uniforms or unpaid customer bills. That would reduce that wage below $7.25. There could be a lower wage paid if you're earning tips. So there's the possibility that that $7.25 would be a lower rate, provided that the tips bring you up to full minimum wage. Training that's done on the job, training directly related to the job, in most circumstances would have to be paid, and it would have to be paid at that minimum wage. We're going to talk about jobs that are prohibited. In this list that I'm going to share are jobs that are prohibited for all workers under the age of 18. You'll see some overlap with the list that Matt shared just before me. I think I don't expect you all to remember this. I want to highlight some of the most common ones that we see in our enforcement. When we think of meat and poultry processing, sometimes we think of meat processing facilities. Kids may be working overnight. Those have been highlighted in the news and certainly very concerning. But meat processing does include a meat slicer, which would be in grocery delis and would also be in restaurants. That is prohibited to operate. It is also prohibited to clean. That's very common because groceries and restaurants are where a lot of teens work. We also have a prohibition on several kinds of bakery product machines. So if you're making pizza or working and making cookies, or in a place where there's bread being baked, there's dough mixers, and those are prohibited. There is a prohibition on paper product machines, paper processing. That includes balers or compactors that crush boxes. Those are really common, again, in grocery stores, and it's prohibited unless certain conditions are met to just throw boxes into that compactor or baler. So those are just some of the common ones. You'll see we have overlap with the state. And I want to just mention very briefly that when we have that overlap, that's pretty straightforward. But when there are differences in state and federal law, you might wonder, well, which one are we supposed to follow, or which one applies? And I will offer that the strictest requirement, or the one that adds the most protection, is the one that should be followed. We're going to move on and talk about the rules that apply just to some specific age groups. So we'll start with talking about the age group for 14 and 15-year-olds, briefly mentioning again that the pay for 14 and 15-year-olds would be the federal minimum wage. And I don't have mentioned here overtime because 14 and 15-year-olds hours are capped at 40 under the federal requirements. If they were to work more than 40, well, you should be getting paid overtime, but that would be prohibited to work that many hours in a work week. There are hours and time standards that apply to this age group. Now, we are talking about this age group, 14 and 15-year-olds. Certainly, if someone 13 is in the workforce, which would be a likely problem if it's in a retail restaurant, That's too young to be working. So these time standards would also apply. We're assuming that the minimum age requirements are met. But here, let's talk about the hours and times that can be worked for this age category. The not dependent on school, just the time of year. So from June 1st, from Labor Day to June 1st, you cannot work after 7 p.m. You can never work before 7 a.m. So from Labor Day to June 1st, the window of time that a minor age 14 or 15 can work would be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. The latest time is extended between June 1st and Labor Day. So it could work kind of in that summer window until 9 p.m. Please note that that 7 p.m. is in place on Saturdays and Sundays. Also, there is a cap of 3 hours a day on school days. So this is relevant then to note if school's in session. So the 3 hours, if school was in session on Friday, the max hours that could be worked per day is 3 hours. In a school week, any week when school was in session, any part of the week, the max hours are 18. And then the non-school days, Saturday, Sunday, or a day that school was not in session for any part of that day is 8. And then the maximum hours for a non-school week is 40 hours. There are many jobs that are allowed if you access resources through our youthrules.gov website. There's a lot of information about what jobs are permitted. So many in food service, retail, and groceries, working in an office setting, being a camp counselor, working in lifeguarding, all permitted jobs. We have a very similar list of prohibited occupations. So working in manufacturing and construction and processing. For this age category, just working in those occupations is prohibited. And moving on to 16 and 17-year-olds. So keeping in mind, we already talked about the occupations, the meat slicers, the dough mixers, driving, operating a forklift are prohibited for all workers under 18. So this age category, again, has the pay requirements. There are no limits under federal law related to the hours and times workers in this age group can work. And then the restrictions are those prohibited occupations for workers under 18. If there is something that occurs in the workplace, either there's a deduction made from the paycheck, you're getting scheduled, you're 15 years old and getting scheduled on Friday nights before June 1st. So it's in that window when the latest time is 7 p.m. and getting scheduled until 9. What should you do? The most important thing, or a good starting place, is to simply just know your rights for employers, to be informed about the requirements and to have practices in place that will ensure you're not scheduling. So if you're an employer, scheduling workers until 6:45 p.m. so that you have a little window, a buffer to that latest 7 p.m. time, for example. So being informed is a great first step. If you're a minor entering the workforce and it's your first job, we can imagine that someone asking you to stay late or to cover a shift, that there is a high likelihood you'd want to please a colleague who's asking you to switch shifts or to support a manager who's scheduling you. There's different options you'd have. One may be to talk to an adult with whom you have confidence. Either way, there is a resource at the Department of Labor where you can reach out, find out answers to your questions, and if necessary, you can file a complaint. The youthrules.gov website is a fantastic resource, but you could also reach out there's a phone number, it's 1-866-4-US-WAGE. Again, it's 1-866-4-US-WAGE. There's also access to different stories, things that the Department of Labor is finding. We publicize some of our enforcement. You can find us on social media. We've got a QR code here if you're interested in more about rules, regulations, and some of our enforcement. There you can access us and learn more. And that is all I have. Thank you very much. Excited to be here.
I think that puts me up next. My name is Tom McCarthy. As was announced at the top, I am the Associate Deputy State Superintendent at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, DPI for short. Because I'm a bit of an outsider in the workforce space, I think it's important to take a step back at the beginning, let you know that we are the K-12 schools agency. And from a where are we going and how are we working standpoint, we have recently updated our vision and mission. And our vision is that we are trying to create engaged learners that create a better Wisconsin together. And we're doing that by trying to provide equitable, transformative, and sustainable educational experiences that develop our learners, schools, libraries, and communities here in Wisconsin. I'm giving you that spiel, and you're probably thinking in your brain, hey, you didn't say workforce. That is because we firmly believe here at DPI that workforce is in everything that we do. When we look at Census Bureau data, it tells us that 6 in 10 people live within 10 miles of their home, and 8 in 10 people live within 100 miles of their home. In other words, we don't move a whole lot. So if you're anything near my age, dating all the way back probably to sometime in the 1920s, your experience in K-12 education, probably, whether we like to admit it or not, amounted to a 2-track system. And those 2 tracks were college-bound or vocational and military together. In the past probably 10 to 20 years, we've made an effort to try to blend them. Something that you probably have heard jargon in many states referred to as college and career ready. And what we have learned from doing that is that in and of itself, the system needs to change if we are actually going to do that. And it needs to change because a lot of people are within that 2-track system, sort of like me. My own personal experience, I think a lot of people categorize me as a college-bound learner. I think I probably would have done better in the vocational and military track. But there's a way that we can have it both. And what we are seeing around the state of Wisconsin, there are pockets of excellence that are happening where school districts are figuring out how to, as Governor Evers would like to say, walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. They are serving students in a way that sets them up for career, whether that requires college or whether that sets them up immediately to enter the workforce. And one of the key concepts that we're seeing happening at the local level is the idea or concept of career clusters. And I'm going to get wonky and sort of define that for you because career cluster is education jargon. But what it really means is that it's a grouping of jobs that serves as a tool for school districts to create and categorize the knowledge and skills that it requires to be successful in those particular careers. So think health sciences if I want to become a nurse. And if I'm landing in that health science career cluster and eventually I decide, you know what, I actually want to be a doctor, there's overlap in those skills and dispositions. What we have discovered in the K-12 space in working with the workforce and employers is that that overlap happens in a consistent fashion as you sort of move around these career clusters. To make those career clusters successful, though, it requires K-12 education to organize itself into career pathways. And that career pathway then sets up the learner to be the center of that experience and says, hey, learner, what do you need to do? What courses do you need to take? And how do you need to prepare yourself to be successful in landing in that particular career cluster? So we like to refer to that as sort of a roadmap that experience and learning guides you through that roadmap to figure out how to get you into that right career cluster. So if I'm saying something that feels familiar to you, it shouldn't be a surprise. We've been at this sort of concept for a while. And you're probably wondering if that's the case, what is new? What are you doing then to accelerate or push that forward? One of the things that we've been at recently is to think about some of the things that educators know well, which is academic standards, and incorporate them into these career clusters and career pathways. And now you're probably thinking, hey, Guy, what is a standard? Well, a standard is an objective or a learning target. And that learning target and objective actually provides the specificity, but most importantly, the consistency that allows school districts to move from pockets of excellence to a systemic approach to how we are preparing kids for their next stage, the workforce. In Wisconsin, we have a ton of local control at play. So those standards are sort of the way that we can sharpen the ask around creating this experience for our learners where we're orienting towards careers without losing some of the best parts of local control that provide flexibility and the ability to address local community and regional need for workforce outputs. We are also really working hard on what we're calling life work and learning skills. And you can think of this sort of as an extension or an offshoot of social and emotional learning, which takes place at a very young age to teach kids how to interact with the world. Life and work learning skills are sort of that, how do you actually prepare yourself for the soft skills of a job? And again, it's really, really critical that we are calibrating this across the state. And we're doing so with a couple important things in mind. One, we know that the regional workforce needs of different places of Wisconsin are not the same. And two, we know that the local conditions of a school district are not the same. So as we're creating these systems, we have to be respectful of the fact that not all of them are equally prepared to take on the challenges of pivoting a giant system, K-12 education, to think differently about preparation. The other really important thing that we are emphasizing is the importance of youth voice in this particular concept. So in the past couple of years coming out of the pandemic, one of the things we've really focused on is spending time talking to kids and saying, hey, what do you need? And surprise, surprise, most of them are cognizant of the fact that this is a need. And what they really want from their educators in schools is for the people that are teaching them to be able to translate why this matters. I call this the fractions problem. I think a lot of us who maybe didn't like math thought, why the heck am I learning fractions and how is this ever going to benefit me? And the joke that we hear from young people a lot is funny. In your generation, I bet you said that you would never have a calculator in your pocket everywhere you went, and that's why math mattered. And yet we're all carrying around supercomputers in our hands now. So what kids want is to be able to translate that knowledge into how it matters for them in the future. And what that looks like in practice is using this opportunity to engage them in their own personal educational journey and to really focus on why it matters for them and to connect it to the decisions they're making in the moment. And I think about myself a lot in this. I know I'm an old guy that's got gray hair now, but that would have really helped me get a better understanding of my future path and what would be lining up and how I could make better decisions in that particular moment in time. And honestly, for people like myself, this is a bit of a self-serving exchange. We know that as Wisconsin's demographics are shifting, we have a state that is suffering from a population decline. In the future demographic that's coming forward, that's in our schools right now, looks a little different than the one that's currently leading the state. So what we can't do is factor for a future system that looks exactly like the current. We have to future plan for this. And we can't assume that there are more people coming along that have the same backgrounds and standpoints. And that requires that youth voice to be front and center of what we are doing. It also means that this conversation around career readiness and clusters and moving things into a more systemic approach is how we get through to the future generation and land them for success in their future, not ours. So looking forward if anybody has any questions at the end to talk about this, and totally understand my presentation's a little different and laying right into that school people thing. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for logging in. My name is David Polk. I am the director of the Bureau of Apprenticeship Standards, where our Wisconsin Youth Apprenticeship System is housed. Wisconsin has the longest standing youth apprenticeship system. It started back in 1991, and it's modeled after Wisconsin's also oldest registered apprenticeship system. The programs are for 1 or 2 years for juniors and seniors in high school, and it combines related instruction with employment, just as Wisconsin's registered apprenticeship system does. The minimum hours are 450 hours per year to participate in a youth apprenticeship, and about 75% of our school districts currently participate in youth apprenticeship. Youth apprenticeship is a little bit different from registered apprenticeship because youth apprenticeship consortia around the state are the ones that execute the programs very regionally. As was spoken to earlier, the Youth Apprenticeship Consortia have a great take on the needs of the workforce in their respective area and respective districts, and can pair youth apprentices with those work needs for their specific area. We have 5 full-time staff that work on youth apprenticeship, that work for the state to execute the program. And we also have 39 youth apprenticeship consortia. And those consortia are made up of school districts, CSAs, and we have some programs that also work statewide for specific occupations. The key elements for our youth apprenticeship program is industry developed skill standards. We have employers that participate in building the skill standards. So this is not just a regular job that a youth is participating in. They're actually gaining a skill and a very specific experience so that they can make a conscious decision on if they would like to continue in this occupation post high school. A skilled mentor is paired with the youth apprentice to help to provide training and a very specific experience for the occupation that the youth apprentice is participating in. The related instruction has to be in line with the work-based learning experience. So for instance, if I'm an electrician union apprentice, I may have a trades math class that's delivered at my high school, or even geometry is a related instruction class for that specific occupation. Local program operation within unified statewide parameters. So a lot of the parameters for young people working or high school students working were discussed earlier. The youth apprenticeship program must be in line with that. There is a performance evaluation and a checklist of required skills that a youth apprentice must reach to certify participation. And after that, after all of those things, there's a certificate of occupational proficiency upon completion of that youth apprenticeship program. We have an extensive list of program areas for youth apprenticeship, and the ones highlighted on the right side of your screen are our newest program areas: business administration, education and training, government and public administration, human services, and law and public safety are all program areas that are growing very, very quickly. As you can see in this graph, youth apprenticeship has been exploding recently. Young people are getting the occupational training that they are willing to seek out in their respective areas. And you see that we're consistently breaking records in youth apprenticeship participation. Here are the link to our youth apprenticeship website and more documentation to help support participation and rules around youth apprenticeship. What we're seeing now with the growth of youth apprenticeship and record-breaking numbers is a lot of youth apprentices that participate in the statewide program are migrating into registered apprenticeship. We have close to 17,000 participating registered apprentices across the state and over 200 different occupations that have registered apprenticeships attached to them. Some of the newer occupations are found in healthcare, IT, transportation, and education. So here is what I was alluding to. As you see earlier, 5 or 6 years ago, the migration from youth apprentice to registered apprentice was a little light. It wasn't spoken to very much, but you can see as late as 2024, this current year, and going back 1 year, 10%, over 10% of all of the new registered apprentices had participated in youth apprenticeship. So more and more youth apprentice participants are going directly into registered apprenticeship, which combines those same standards, the education requirement and the on-the-job learning for one to become skilled in a very specific occupation. So here's the big question: where are we getting those 10% of new registered apprentices? Most of which are going directly into manufacturing registered apprenticeships and construction trade registered apprentices. And the other occupational pathways are consistently growing. One of those reasons is we're building more and more registered apprenticeships in those specific occupational pathways. Here's my information. Feel free to reach out with any questions on our Youth and Registered Apprenticeship Program, and I'll hand it back to Deputy Secretary Jenny Serino.
Well, thank you very much, David, and thank you to all our panelists. And David, I've got a question that's going to be coming up for you. So if you want to just stay there for a moment and keep your mic on and your camera on, I want to remind everyone else that we do have an active chat function going. So if you want to submit your questions, we'll answer them. We'll try to group them by themes, but we'll also work through as many of those questions as we possibly can. We so much appreciate your participation and the great insights provided by our speakers today. So David, the first question is building off some of the comments that you provided, and really it goes to the fact of, you know, a parent's quandary. My child doesn't seem to have their career aspirations in focus. What are some resources that you could lead them to, either through your work with, you know, apprenticeship, registered apprenticeship, youth apprenticeship, or are there other resources on the DWD website through the Division of Employment and Training that might help students, you know, explore those options on their own and try and bring some of those aspirations into focus? Take it away.
Absolutely. So the Youth Apprenticeship Program is only a commitment during that youth time. So we have plenty of youth apprentices that go into their youth apprenticeship and find out that what they thought they wanted to get into was not exactly what they wanted to get into. And I always tell young people that one of the biggest things that you can find out when trying to choose an occupation is not only what you want to do, but what you don't want to do. That said, the youth apprenticeship is an awesome way for a young person to kind of test the water in an occupation that they feel they would like to take on. We also have certified pre-apprenticeship, and you can find all of those on our website, which a lot of them also have youth participation, where a young person can go and test the water of a specific occupation and find out if they really want to go down that pathway.
Thank you so much. Next, I'm going to bring on Ramona and Matt. If you all could turn on your mics and your cameras. We've got a couple questions that go into both of your areas. Thank you. And I'm going to move you both to the stage here. All right. And so the first question relates to homeschooling. And so the question is, you know, we've talked a little bit about work hours, classroom hours, but what about for students that are in homeschool? And Matt, I don't know if that's something that you can take to start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jenny. This is actually one of those 1% of areas I referred to where the federal interpretation and the state interpretation is a little different. I know that the Department of Labor under the FLSA says that even if you're homeschooled, the hours that you're permitted to work are sort of congruent with the hours that your local school district is in session. The Equal Rights Division, on the other hand, and this was sort of a development that happened during the pandemic, we view it as hours when the minor is required to be in school. It's the employer's responsibility to verify that, but if they are homeschooled and part of that homeschool involves some kind of work experience, as long as they have permission from their parents or whoever is doing the homeschooling to be at work, that's fine. The same goes for private schools or for what they were calling asynchronous learning at the time of the pandemic. So when a teacher assigns a lecture that's a video record that you can watch at any time, that's asynchronous learning. And if there is no requirement as to when they do that, then they can work anytime when they're not required to be in school. So it is a little bit different between the Department of Labor and the Equal Rights Division, but you can see how similarly applied. It is the employer's responsibility to verify those. So ignorance is not an excuse about whether the minor was legally permitted to work. You do have to find that out and verify that. So,
thank you, Matt. And I'm going to have another question for you in just a moment regarding work programs that may be operated within the school. But first, Ramona, I've got a question for you, and that relates to the mechanics of those work permits. So if somebody goes to that link that we provided to get that online work permit, what happens next for the student and the parent? What happens next with that work permit process?
All right, great question. So what happens next is that there will be an email that gets generated, and it has work permit instructions, and it lets the parent and the minor know that the permit will be mailed directly to the employer. But with this email confirmation, the permit is valid and the minor may begin working upon receipt of that email. So they can show it to their employer. And if the employer has any questions, they can always reach out to us at erinfo@dwd.wisconsin.gov, or they can call us directly at 608-266-6860.
Thanks, Ramona. Really appreciate that.
You're
So back to you, Matt, with a question. One of the first slides was regarding school food service. Now, how does that work with some of those other work time specifications or prohibitions that you mentioned earlier? I do believe that in some schools, there are minors who are employed in cafeteria jobs or in that food service that may be really part of their early culinary training. What's permitted, what isn't permitted, and can you offer any guidance there?
Sure. So there are actually a couple of areas where minors under 14 even can work in schools, and one of them is working in the school cafeteria or school food service, or school lunch at any rate. That is perfectly fine. However, again, the same prohibitions apply to hazardous work. So as Kristen mentioned, no meat slicers, if any high schools have meat slicers. No sort of industrial bakery type equipment. I expect that, and I'm not an expert on what happens in a school cafeteria when they cook. I imagine there's not a lot of sort of dangerous industrial culinary machines in there, but the key answer would be if you are a school official and you're considering employing minors in the school cafeteria, just check the cooking and baking prohibitions on our website and verify that any tasks that you'll be asking a minor to do are permitted by the law. But aside from that, you're good to go.
Thanks. One more question for Ramona, and then I'm going to bring up Tom McCarthy and David Pokes. We've got a couple of school and apprenticeship related questions. So Ramona, one more question for you. You know, the first work experience can be intimidating for students. I think Matt made the point in his great presentation that, you know, you do have the power as a young worker to politely decline, you know, a directive that, you know, you feel in that moment may be in violation of the law, but that's often a hard thing for young students to do. If you are a young student listening here and you feel that you have been asked, you know, to do something that falls outside of, you know, the rules and regulations, what's the best way to get in touch with equal rights? And then what happens next? Because I think for some students, there's also that fear of, you know, they don't want to lose their job. They want to have that good employment experience. They don't want something really bad to happen to their employer. But can you describe what happens, how someone can go about filing that complaint, and then what happens next with respect to your process?
Sure. And again, they're free to contact us directly, whether by email or phone. And sometimes maybe it's just a matter of clarifying something with the employer. Again, before we get into making sure that somebody's complying, maybe there's just some misinformation or misunderstanding. So again, that would be the first opportunity to answer any kind of questions that the employer may have, right? Also, sometimes if the parent were to maybe be the go-between and explain, there is great information on our website. But yes, they would be able to contact us and let us know if there are any violations. And through the intake process, that information would be gathered and that investigation would be initiated.
And can they file those complaints anonymously?
Matt?
I'll jump in there. With child labor complaints, we do accept them anonymously, and they can. Now, of course, in many cases, if it's about a particular prohibited practice, the employer may be able to know. So it's also important for teen employees to know that it's unlawful under our law to retaliate against them for filing a complaint with the Equal Rights Division. So in the event that they file a complaint with us saying that they worked not permitted hours or prohibited employment, and we perform an investigation, that conduct is protected, and the employer is not permitted to take any adverse action against the minor, whether that be reducing their hours, firing them, anything like that, as a form of retaliation for having filed with the division.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you. And next, I'm going to bring up
Thank you.
David Polk and Tom McCarthy on the stage. Thank you. Thanks, David. And while I'm bringing up Tom McCarthy, my first question is to you. And that really relates to some of those new youth apprenticeships that may be in the future, that things that students want to do that an employer would like to see. They may see an opportunity for a student to get involved in. How do you get a new youth apprenticeship pathway started? What are those steps involved?
So firstly, an employer can contact us at apprenticeships.dwd@dwd.wisconsin.gov. Our staff is constantly monitoring our main email box, and from there we reach back. When it's being developed, all apprenticeships are developed, both youth and registered, from the employer. So we reach out to the employers or work with the employer that reaches out to us, and we help to create those standards for youth apprenticeships. It's a checklist that those employers help us to create. For registered apprenticeship, it's an Exhibit A, both of which include the on-the-job competencies that either the employer needs or the on-the-job competencies to reach a specific certification level. But from there, we create all of those work processes for youth apprenticeship. That checklist is then shared throughout the state for that specific occupation. And those youth apprenticeship consortia or school districts that I spoke to earlier are free to utilize those checklists with the employers that work in their respective service areas. For registered apprenticeship, once we create that initial Exhibit A, then we're able to take that Exhibit A and work with employers all across the state to then implement that specific registered apprenticeship.
David, thank you. It's just fascinating how flexible really youth apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship are in terms of responding to emerging needs, things that such as artificial intelligence that we couldn't have foreseen years ago, and then offering IT apprenticeships or other opportunities. So thank you for that work and that continued flexibility. And in that vein, Tom, I wanted to ask you, you made some excellent remarks earlier about, how school curriculum has become more flexible to adapt to learners' needs and really bring forward that voice of our youth in helping offer new alternatives, new flexibility and pathways. Are you able to talk a little bit about some new career exploration opportunities that you see coming into play in various districts throughout the state? What's happening on the ground in terms of new types of curriculum, and how that interfaces with future work and employment opportunities?
Yeah, I think on the ground, you've got two things going on. First and foremost, in the 2013 to 2017 period of time, the department, alongside some regional workforce partners, began a program that's called Academic and Career Planning. So there's a tool now that every sixth grader through senior in high school uses to gauge skills and program them into outputs. Where things have accelerated beyond that is specifically under Dr. Underley's lead here at DPI, we have been challenging school districts to think differently about how they're offering cornerstone or key subjects. So in other words, to sort of challenge the dogma that every kid needs to go through this Algebra 1, Algebra 2 calculus math program, and that instead thinking things more through about what is required for a particular career field. So I know you mentioned curriculum and instruction. I think that actually backs all the way out to standards too, though. In other words, what are we expecting kids to know at these particular guideposts? And when we talk to young people, they're game for hard, challenging conversations about what they're learning. The point that I was making about youth agency and youth voices, they want to understand how it relates to their career. And the real synergy is happening in schools where you have districts that are figuring out how to do that translation exercise in real time and to pivot their offerings, to actually pivot those classes and the curriculum, the things being taught in the classes, to make sure that their kids are successful in whatever choice that they make. And then being organized enough as a system, as an education system specifically, to not just offer the higher ed course, but to also offer those career opportunities and set those kids up in that way. And I do want to echo a lot of that is because we have really good partners in you at DWD. David is an amazing resource in both the YA and the RA paths that we are working on. And so we wouldn't be able to do this without you. And it does require that cross-agency systemic look at some of these things, because we're talking about pivoting very large systems to work differently for kids. And that's work worth doing, but it's hard work.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tom. And I want to extend our thanks to everyone here who's participated in today's webinar. On behalf of the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development, I'm Jennifer Serino, Assistant Deputy Secretary. And I do want to share one final question, and that was, will we be emailing out today's recording to all the participants? The short answer to that is it's going to be a really big file because of all the great information and the slide deck that we had. So instead, we're going to make it accessible to everyone by posting it to our website. You'll be able to find that online before too long through our Equal Rights Division pathway on the dwd.wisconsin.gov website. That will take you to our YouTube page where you'll be able to find this as well as resources about welcoming youth to the workforce. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for participating, and we look forward to more. Thank you. Bye-bye.